I sat at my sleek, glass desk, the morning sunlight spilling across my laptop and the faint scent of roasted coffee beans drifting from my mug. Everything looked perfect, my carefully curated office, the neatly stacked reports, even the silk blouse I'd chosen this morning felt like armor against the world. And yet, as my phone buzzed for the third time, I couldn't ignore the pit forming in my stomach. It was him, my brother, Max. And I knew before even opening the message that it wasn't going to be innocent. I stared at the screen. Thought you'd like to know. I told your boss you quit. My fingers trembled slightly as I set the phone down, the irony bitter on my tongue. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I leaned back, letting the smooth leather of my chair mold to my posture, and let out a slow, controlled breath. Hurt flickered across my chest, but it was quickly replaced by a spark of pride. I wasn't the same unsure, timid girl I had been when Max thought he could sabotage me. The city skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a reminder of how far I'd come. Every promotion, every long night of double shifts, every client pitch I'd agonized over, they had all led me here, to a position Max couldn't touch. And yet, the betrayal still stung, sharp and sudden, because family should have known better. I stared at the message again, my reflection in the glass pane behind my desk staring back at me, confident, composed, untouchable. The faint clink of my coffee cup against the saucer reminded me that life hadn't broken me, it had refined me. I smiled wryly, almost amused by the audacity of him thinking he could derail me with a single text. For a moment, I let myself feel the rush of anticipation. This wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about reclaiming what was mine and showing Max, and everyone else who had ever doubted me, exactly who I had become. The phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, adjusted the cuffs of my blouse, and typed a simple, decisive reply. My fingers hovered, then pressed send. The game had just begun. I remember that day like it was etched into my skin. I was 22, fresh out of college, full of ambition but painfully naive. My first real job, an entry-level position at a small but promising marketing firm, felt like the beginning of everything I had worked for. I was eager, nervous, and desperate to prove myself. Max, always the loud, confident older brother, had his own idea of how the world worked. He didn't see me as a capable woman carving her own path. He saw a little sister who could be pushed around, manipulated, or made the butt of a joke. That morning, I had been rehearsing a presentation for hours, my hands trembling as I flipped through slides, when my phone rang. It was my boss. "Jessica," he said, his voice clipped, "I heard you're quitting." I froze. My heart thudded painfully against my ribcage. I'm not quitting," I stammered, disbelief tightening my throat. "Why would you think that?" There was silence, then a faint chuckle. Max called. "He said you decided to leave." I sank into the chair, a cold wave of betrayal washing over me. Max. He had told my boss I quit without even asking me, assuming I couldn't stand up for myself. The lump in my throat made it hard to swallow, and my hands shook as I gripped the edge of the desk. For the first time, I felt utterly alone in the world I had tried so hard to enter. That evening, I went to my grandmother's apartment. She had always been my quiet anchor, the voice of reason in a family of storms. She handed me a small, leather-bound notebook, the kind she used to sketch her gardens in. "Write everything you learned, Jessica," she said softly, pressing the notebook into my hands. "Keep it. Learn from it. And remember, you don't need anyone's approval to succeed." Her words sank deep, planting a seed of defiance I didn't yet recognize. That night, I made a decision. I would prove not just to Max, but to the world, and to myself, that no one had the power to define my worth. I would take the betrayal, the humiliation, the sting of being dismissed, and turn it into fuel. By the time I left my grandmother's apartment, the notebook clutched to my chest, my resolve had crystallized. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to rise, quietly, deliberately, and on my own terms. The weeks after that night were a blur of determination and exhaustion. I poured every ounce of energy into learning, experimenting, and growing. My grandmother's notebook became my Bible. I scribbled ideas, strategies, lessons from every failure, every awkward client pitch, every rejection. Slowly, I began to see patterns, to understand the rhythm of the business world in a way I never had in college classrooms. I found a mentor in Ms. Evelyn Carter, a formidable marketing executive who had built her career from the ground up. She saw something in me that I was only beginning to recognize myself, a stubborn streak, a willingness to learn, a refusal to be defined by other people's expectations. "Jessica," she said one evening after a grueling client meeting, "you've got the instincts, but instincts without discipline are useless. Let's turn your chaos into strategy." It wasn't easy. Late nights at my cramped apartment, reworking presentations until my eyes blurred. Weekends spent on unpaid freelance projects, fighting self-doubt and the ever-present fear that I wasn't good enough. I learned to navigate office politics, to read people without letting their opinions weigh me down. Every small win, the first client who signed without hesitation, the first campaign I led successfully, the first month I made more than enough to pay my bills, felt monumental. Through it all, I kept my family in the dark. Social media was carefully curated, my posts modest and nonspecific. Max thought I was still struggling, maybe just scraping by, still fragile and dependent. He had no idea that each email I sent, each presentation I perfected, was a quiet declaration of independence. The office where I now sat, with polished wood desks, abstract art on the walls, and the hum of productivity in the air, was the result of years of relentless effort. Every detail reflected my journey, personal touches mixed with professional triumphs. And though I had become successful, I had never lost sight of the lessons that betrayal had taught me: resilience, resourcefulness, and the quiet power of rising above. I was still learning, still striving, but unlike the girl who had trembled in front of her boss months ago, I now understood my value. And deep down, a part of me relished the thought of Max one day realizing that the little sister he had tried to undermine had not only survived but thrived, on her own terms. The notebook still sat on my desk, its pages filled with reminders of every obstacle I had overcome. It was my silent witness, the symbol of the journey I had carved with grit, intellect, and heart. No one had the power to define me anymore, not Max, not anyone. And as I adjusted my chair, smoothing the lapels of my blazer, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The game was far from over. The door to my office opened with a quiet click, and I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation, a thrill I hadn't allowed myself to indulge in for months. Max stepped inside, a smirk on his face, thinking he was walking into the same timid sister he'd undermined years ago. Behind him trailed Mom and Dad, faces carefully neutral, their eyes betraying curiosity, maybe even a hint of judgment. "Jessica," Max began, voice loud, almost mocking, "I didn't expect you here. Thought you'd—" His words faltered as he scanned the room, eyes widening. The sleek office, the polished desk, the walls adorned with framed certificates and abstract art that spoke of taste and refinement. This wasn't the apartment he had assumed I still occupied. I stood, letting my presence fill the room before speaking. I could see the gears turning in their minds, trying to reconcile the girl they thought they knew with the woman standing before them. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as I moved toward the desk, my hands calm, poised. "Surprised?" I asked softly, letting a hint of amusement color my tone. Max opened his mouth, then closed it. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. "I know what you all think," I continued, picking up the leather-bound notebook from my desk, my grandmother's gift, my talisman of independence. That I struggled, that I couldn't manage. That Max had somehow defined my limits for me. I set the notebook down, letting the weight of years of silent effort settle in the room like a physical presence. "I didn't quit," I said firmly, meeting Max's eyes. "You told my boss I did. You thought it would destroy me." Instead, I paused, letting the suspense hang, watching disbelief ripple across his face. I took the position. I worked harder than anyone imagined. I learned, I grew, and now I lead this company. I'm not just employed here. I'm the director of strategy, and I own a significant share of the firm. Their jaws dropped. I could see Max's mind racing, guilt and shock fighting for dominance. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. Dad's eyes were wide, a mixture of awe and regret etched across his features. This, I said, gesturing around the office. All of this is mine. Every client I've brought in, every project I've managed, every late night I've endured. It's built by me. Not by anyone else. Not by Max. Not by luck. Not by family assumptions. Max's smirk had vanished, replaced by the first hint of real fear. He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. Save it. I'm not here to yell. I'm here to show you the truth. And the truth is simple. Betrayal doesn't define me. Hard work, resilience, and focus define me. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the office air conditioning. I let them absorb it. The magnitude of my success, the quiet power of a woman who had been underestimated and dismissed, but who now stood untouchable. I stepped back, letting my words sink in. The look in Max's eyes, the mix of guilt, amazement, and dawning understanding, was priceless. My parents' expressions softened, admiration mingling with a touch of shame. For the first time, I felt the full weight of victory, not the petty kind, but the satisfying, empowering kind. The kind that comes when you rise above betrayal, silence doubt, and claim your own story. I took a deep breath, letting the moment linger. Max's wide-eyed stare and my parents' quiet, tentative expressions told me everything I needed to know. The balance of power had shifted. I wasn't the little sister who flinched at his words anymore. I wasn't the overlooked child waiting for approval. Now I had a choice, to extend a hand or to close the door entirely. I'm going to lay this out clearly, I said, my voice steady measured. I can help you, but only if you're willing to change. Only if you're willing to meet me where I am, not where you think I should be. Max swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it, only firmness tempered with a sliver of compassion. You've got two paths. One, you recognize the damage you caused, you take responsibility, and you stop underestimating people, especially your family. Two, you walk away and leave this life to me. He hesitated, clearly shaken. I continued, turning to my parents. Mom, Dad, support me in ways that actually matter. Stop second-guessing my choices or comparing me to Max. Respect my boundaries and my achievements. It's time to drop old habits of favoritism and assumptions. Then, with a deep inhale, I added the final piece, the most personal condition. And all of you, Max, Mom, Dad, you have to pursue your own growth. Stop living in shadows of resentment or old grudges. Pursue your careers, your passions, your integrity. Only then can our relationships be genuine. Max's jaw tightened. I could see the wheels turning, realizing that the person he tried to sabotage had just handed him a roadmap to redemption, but only if he was willing to earn it. I leaned against my desk, folding my arms, letting silence do the heavy lifting. I care about you all, I said softly, but I will not bend to old patterns. I will not allow my life to be defined by past betrayals. I am giving you a chance, my terms, my conditions. And you can choose to accept them, or you can watch from the sidelines as I continue to rise. The room remained quiet. Max looked down at his shoes, a flush of shame creeping into his cheeks. My parents exchanged a glance, their faces softening in understanding. The tension that had clawed at my chest for years was beginning to dissipate. For the first time, I felt in control not just of my career, but of the narrative that had once been hijacked by betrayal and doubt. I knew the power shift was complete. The old dynamics were broken, replaced by a new order, one where I was no longer a pawn in family drama, but a fully realized woman who had earned respect, authority, and independence through her own unwavering effort. And as I looked at each of them, I realized that compassion and firmness could coexist. I could give them a chance, but only if they were willing to rise alongside me, instead of standing in my way. Weeks passed, and the change was gradual but unmistakable. Max stopped undermining, stopped making snide remarks, and began asking questions about the business, not to manipulate but to understand. He started taking responsibility for his mistakes, and though pride still tugged at him, there was a humility in the way he approached me now that had never existed before. Mom and Dad, too, began to shift. They respected my boundaries, gave me space to grow, and started pursuing their own passions without relying on me to validate them. I noticed small changes. Mom spending weekends at an art studio she'd always wanted to try, Dad finally signing up for that writing workshop he dreamed about for years. The family dynamics were no longer centered on control, favoritism, or comparison. They were rooted in respect, understanding, and growth. I kept the leather-bound notebook on my desk, pages filled with lessons and reminders of the journey I had fought so hard to create. It had been my anchor through sleepless nights, doubts, and betrayals. Now it was a symbol not only of my achievements, but of the person I had become, resilient, confident, and self-reliant. One evening, as I looked out over the city skyline from my office window, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The pain of being underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed had not disappeared, but it had transformed into strength. Each setback had been a stepping stone, every doubt a fuel for ambition, and every betrayal a reminder that I was capable of standing on my own. Max peeked into my office that evening, a tentative smile on his face. "Thanks," he said quietly, "for giving me a chance and for showing me what it really means to fight for yourself." I smiled back, warmth in my eyes but steel in my posture. "It's not about giving chances, Max. It's about recognizing them. And now you have one. Make it count." As he left, I returned to my desk, tracing my fingers over the worn cover of the notebook. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "You don't need anyone's approval to succeed." I had taken her advice to heart, had transformed betrayal into triumph, and had carved a life defined by strength, grace, and self-respect. And as I leaned back in my chair, letting the city lights shimmer around me, I whispered to myself, a soft but unwavering declaration. I am enough. I always was, and now the world knows it too. Bottom of form.